That's wonderful. And Pierce Chemicals really comes into play in that.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
That's wonderful.
That's right.
How long does it take normally to plan a funeral, Charles? What all is involved in that, to segue off of the chemical side there? How long does it take to actually plan a funeral?
That's a good question, and one that's somewhat difficult to answer. I would relate that to one of your businesses. That's kind of like asking one of your best reporters, how long does it take to write an article? Well, right. Mr. Buchanan, when he taught me in school, joked about it. The correct answer to that question is as long as it takes. Right. We have families from all different walks of life. You can make plans with a family for a funeral in as little as 15 to 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. You may be with a family for 3 hours. Right. Different people have different amounts of questions about different things. The death may have been tragic. You may need to ask and answer those questions in a short amount of time. Other people want you to talk with them and counsel with them again, and you may be with them for 2 or 3 hours. So I used to tell people, though, when sometimes you actually go to the place of death, right, to bring the person that died back to the funeral home, and a lot of times you will consult with the family then and set an appointment maybe for the next day for them to come in. Right. And I would tell them to allow a couple of hours for that appointment.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah. So I would say a couple of hours you're going to need to make those plans.
Because they never know. The families don't know in advance some of the questions that they're going to eventually ask you. Mm-hmm. You don't know some of the answers the way you may give them or provide them based off of that family. As you said, if it's not a tragic death, what are some of the most, I mean, if it's just something, if it's old age, for instance, mm-hmm, what are some of the most commonly asked questions that you've had to field as it relates during that time if they're trying to actually plan out the loss of a loved one?
There's still a lot of information that has to be compiled in any death, and, right, and a lot of times people don't understand that the funeral director is the one that compiles all the information that is eventually put on the death certificate for it to be filed as a permanent record, mm-hmm, and all of those questions are handled during that appointment. Mm-hmm. The actual planning of the service, which involves the time, the place, the day, and it doesn't involve just us. We would have to contact ministers that are going to be involved, right, musicians that are going to be involved, and a lot of times you can't assume people's schedule. A lot of times we would actually make the phone calls while the family was there, right, to make sure that suited the minister's schedule, for example, and to make sure that the church wasn't being used for another function, that, right, we could use the, wow, church. Yeah, the so clothing that's necessary. Yeah. The obituary would have to be compiled. The funeral home helps the family with the obituary. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of information. Merchandise has to be selected, caskets, outer burial containers, urns if it's going to be a cremation, and there's a lot of information to cover.
Golly, that is amazing. And you really have to have that experience, have to be a certified professional to be able to properly and adequately serve that family during that time. Is that something that folks oftentimes get in a mortuary school, or do they apprentice, for instance, or they work oftentimes in a funeral home? How does someone become, is it just over time they're skilled and capable of answering and preparing and planning for a funeral?
Time certainly helps, experience helps, on-the-job training helps, and it varies from state to state what the requirements are. But in South Carolina, there is a 2-year apprenticeship program that you have to serve before you can become licensed.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Everyone in the state?
That's correct.
Wow.
In order to become a licensed funeral director, you have to serve 2 years apprenticeship. And then there's some educational requirements, and they vary a little bit between the funeral director's license and the embalmer's license. But you can cover all of your educational requirements by attending, of course, Upton Jones College of Funeral Service, right, in Atlanta. Right. And once you serve your apprenticeship and then meet your educational requirements, there's national and state testing that's required, board testing that's required, that you have to take those tests, and right, then you can stand for your licensing.
Sounds like very serious stuff.
It is, and it's more time-consuming than people realize. Between your apprenticeship and your schooling requirements, now it's a minimum of 3.5 years in South Carolina.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Wow. Is South Carolina different than most states? Is it more aggressive in the amount of time that has to be spent?
That's about average. There are even some states that require more school than we do.
Really?
But that's about average, to my knowledge, of the state requirements. That's kind of in line with what everybody else requires.
Just wondering about what would be the percentage of male to female down at Upton Jones? Not to put you on the spot, and you may not know. Are there many women going into the funeral industry?
Changing rapidly. That's
Really?
funny that you see that, yes. Even from when I was in school, which was 20 years ago, it was probably 70-30 men when I was in school,
Right.
and the class I just spoke to last week is reversed.
Is that? Oh, come on.
It certainly is.
70% women,
Yes.
30%. Oh, come on.
Yes,
Really?
it's amazing. Now, every class isn't quite that percentage,
Right,
but
right.
The classes that I'm seeing now are more than 50% female.
Now, why do you think that is? Do you have any idea about that? We got about 5 minutes, Charles, and I'm just thinking.
I don't know all the reasons. We
Yeah.
talk about that. One thing is, I think the funeral industry has evolved, and funeral home owners have evolved.
Right.
Sadly, I think 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of owners maybe wouldn't hire women as readily as they will today.
Right.
Of course, there's a lot of lifting involved. There's a lot of physical part of the job that's involved that can be more difficult for smaller, petite ladies. But there is certainly a place for women in funeral service, and I think that's being seen by more and more people. And women are filling more and more of those positions, and they're seeing the opportunities that are available.
That's tremendous, Charles. We had a guest down a couple of weeks ago. We were filming at Grassy Granite. He lives in Charlotte, and he spends a lot of time regularly with a woman, Carolyn Williams, in Charlotte, who's with a Heritage Funeral Services or homes up there. It was fascinating hearing him talk about, just as a layman, what he's learned from her. Of course, she grew up in the business with her father, I believe, who owned a cemetery and funeral home there in Charlotte. But fascinating hearing him talk about just what he learned from her, and now he's begun to think more about his future or just the end of his life, possibly, just from spending time with her, and how caring she has been in helping him understand that.
So many people don't realize the different hats that we wear and the things that their funeral director will guide them through at that time of need. There's a lot of different things that people go through during a death, and there's just such a wide range of reasons that people call on us that so many people just don't think about and don't understand. I used to tell my golf buddies they wouldn't truly appreciate what I do until they need me, and then that's when they understand everything that we do. I have a very good friend that owns a funeral home in Holly Hill, South Carolina, which is a very, very small town.
Right, sure.
And I played in a golf tournament down there last year, and at the very last minute, he had to cancel. He was called to, he got busy at his funeral home.
Right.
He had to cancel the golf tournament and go to work. And I told so many of his friends that day, I said, you all just don't know how lucky you are that he is your local undertaker.
Wow.
Because he is a fine, fine person.
That's tremendous.
And that's part of the business too. The confinement and the unpredictable nature of when death occurs is just usually you almost never know when that's going to happen. And your funeral director is available 24 hours a day.
We had a guest on literally a couple of weeks ago, Rick Neal, who's a licensed funeral director in Baltimore. We were filming at Reflections there in Carolina Forest. It was on Monday, the 11th of February. And it's fascinating as he's highlighting it. He and his wife's 10-year anniversary coming up on Valentine. He said it could be this Thursday. We're going out to dinner. He's not right now in a funeral home, but if he was, highlighting that the call could come and she'd end up getting back home and he'd get to the funeral home and would be out. And I'm sure you've experienced that, Alan, George, Steve, all the folks here. You've just had to, because that family needs you at that moment and not 2 hours from now.
Ask my wife. We brought in the new millennium at McMillan Small Funeral Home. We were at work at 12 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just the way it happened. And I was on call, and duty called, and we were at a New Year's Eve party to bring in the year 2000.
That's fascinating.
Didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, the Y2K thing, folks were freaking out, but y'all were...
We were at the funeral home.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's happened many times, so she'll tell you many stories about that.
Charles, for you, traveling the Carolinas, seeing great operators, your friend in Holly Hill, seeing folks here and in the PD, you must have some feelings of, do you miss it all, being actively involved in the industry of planning out folks' futures?
Yes, I do. There is a big side of me that, not to use cliches, but you are called to do this, and I think once you do this and it is who you become, It's not a job, it's a way of life, and there are certainly things about it that I miss.
Right.
I certainly do with the day-to-day operation of the funeral home and helping people through those times.
There must be things you really love about Pierce Chemicals and being out and visiting all these funeral homes throughout the Carolinas.
I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of great people, get a lot of great ideas, watching how they run their business on a daily basis. Right. I have more flexibility. I was able to make this appointment with you today and keep it. A little more flexibility, a little more time off, and not on call as often. Been able to travel. We have conventions throughout the state that I attend and also throughout the nation. I'm a member of the National Funeral Directors Association as well, and we have annual conventions that are in great places and resorts all over the country, and I'm able to do that. And of course, we work hard when we get there, but we still have some time off to have fun, and this year was Vegas, and next year's Orlando, and
good.
So we have good conventions.
That's wonderful. Charles, thanks so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time.
Oh,
thanks
thank
for being
you very
with us
much.
this morning.
I enjoyed being here.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Charles Miles of Pierce Chemical Company coming up next. Think about that slow progression from painting the picket fence to painting the garage to washing the cars to riding on the grave truck to planning for someone's funeral, to helping to plan that funeral. How about those 5 words, as long as it takes? As long as it takes, the answer to that simple question, how long does it take to plan a funeral? What a great answer. Mr. Buchanan chimed in at Gupton Jones. He chimed in as he sent Charles off to Dunbar. Charles later made that decision, as long as it takes. He made that commitment at an early age. He continues to make that commitment today. You can probably see him out down in Holly Hill visiting with an operator, up in throughout the Carolinas visiting with somebody, knowing that as long as it takes, he'll be there to get the job done. He's making that commitment every day. Funeral operators and owners are making that commitment every day. Learn more about the industry. Take the time, as long as it takes, is their commitment. Charles Miles, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah.